Welcome to this episode of the Level Design Podcast. I'm here with Chris Wilson, Design Director for Cardboard Sword, who are making Siege and the Sandfox, a 2D platformer. Well, how would you describe it, Chris?
The phrase we've ended up using a lot is a stealthvania.
So, a stealthvania.
Yeah, so we're mixing that Metroidvania sort of open world exploration with classic sort of hard edge stealth like Thief or something like that.
Okay. I see it as a unique game from my background as an Unreal Engine developer, because if you say Unreal Engine to anybody, they think, well, Unreal Tournament, they think all the games, the first-person shooter games that are made with the engine.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, Unreal Engine, like sort of Epic's mission statement, at least at some point, I'm sure, was sort of own the high end.
Right.
And yeah, I would say our game is like a very different take on the high end. But yeah, that was our kind of angle, that 2D was an unexplored, sort of literally unexplored perspective in that engine. And we didn't see any reason why not. But it certainly gets people asking questions, so that's always good.
Yeah, I mean, but having said that, it looks gorgeous. It's a super gorgeous game. I mean, you've been doing this for like a couple of years?
Yeah, a while.
You did a whole bunch of video tutorials, right?
Yeah.
Showing how to get how the lighting worked.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the first thing to say is like I'll accept praise all day long for how it looks, because it's absolutely nothing to do with me. The artists, working incredibly hard. Their background is actually 3D, so they hadn't done pixel art before this game. And how we've ended up doing a lot of these talks that I've ended up presenting is what's tend to happen is, we show in the game, and as you said, it's got a very good reception, praise for the visuals. Again, it's fine because I didn't do them. But the artists genuinely sort of struggle to understand, well, why are people so impressed by what this is? Because, they are their own worst critics. Right. And I'm like, well, let's sit down, let's talk about it. And I tease the information out of them by what they've done, which normally starts in a position of, well, nothing really, except huge list of things they've done. And then, we've sort of turned those into video tutorials to show people. I think they're always secretly a bit disappointed that the answer most of the time can be boiled down to hard work. Like there isn't a shortcut. Unreal Engine certainly helps. It has a nice workflow. That's what appealed to the artists, but it doesn't do the work for you.
But that's with anything, right? It's like, I mean, I've been trying to draw or learn to draw, I should say, because drawing, I'm great. It's like the output's crap, but and there is no good answer. Like practice, keep on practicing. It's like
same with any discipline, I think.
Yeah, all of the errors lead to the right thing, right? So
yeah, definitely.
One of the parts that I wanted to discuss with you was like seeing it from the level design point of view. Because I have like in 3D worlds, I can understand it, but it's kind of like very vertical in a way, platform and level design. How have you been approaching that workflow? How have you been approaching with the Siege and the Sandfox? Yeah,
I mean, I think the thing to say is that I kind of take a fairly holistic view to these things, in that they're all really kind of similar. Like, the metrics are different, but, I've worked on racing games. I did work on a 3D stealth game that sadly never got released, but I worked on something like that. And, the starting point is usually the same. It's like, okay, let's figure out the metrics, which, for example, for racing games, we'd go, okay, what's, what we'd call the mean car? What's the average vehicle we expect people to drive? Okay, how fast is it? How quickly can I get around this area? And when you design circuits, you're looking for things to take a certain amount of time, a certain flow to everything, a series of left and right turns. And when you're talking about stealth games, it's like, okay, well, do I have ranged weapons? And if so, how effective are they? Things like that. How far can I see? How far can the enemy see? Now in 3D, that's a little easier to pass because, we're quite used to human beings in 3D perspective. And especially if you're first person, if you're crouched behind an object, people, intuitively understand, well, I can't be seen when I'm behind here. And likewise, they don't question why they can't see on the other side of the pillar. With a 2D game, that's a bit more tricky. But the same sort of things still apply, because obviously we've got this, we've got a light parkour system, so you can, scale walls and things like that. And that's very flow based, right? It's, we figure out the metrics, we see what seems right, how far up a wall can you run, how big is the jump, and all those things. And, you just experiment with those in a separate sandbox. And then I will just, always like finger paint, right? You just doodle, just make little sections, little repertoire of things that I think are fun, and I'm like, cool, I can store those away, and then we're all happy with it. And then you can take those over to the actual levels, And that's kind of all you're really doing. You might have some particular objectives you're trying to hit, but you're still referring back to those metrics you've started from, which I kind of feel is the same for anything. The area that is difficult, which maybe can talk about a bit later, is from a 2D perspective, the idea of what you can see and what the enemy can see isn't as crystal clear. You have to sort of work on that.
Because in a way, in 2D, as a player, you can see a lot.
Yeah. So if you don't specifically design systems to sort of do anything with that.
Like the fog of war type thing.
Yeah, and we can never come up with a sensible name for it, but the most obvious touch point, which comes up with our game all the time, is Mark of the Ninja, and they have this, a volume that obscures what you wouldn't be able to see. So if a door is closed, you cannot see into the room beyond it. And things like that are very important. We always sort of knew they were quite important, but spending a long time working on it without them, it really does change completely how you design a space, because obviously you can't really dramatically reveal things in the same way that you might be able to in 3D, because you can see into the next room without even entering it. You can't really have this dramatic reveal of it, and so we had to sort of orchestrate ways to do that. If you're up somewhere high, and let's say you don't have this obscuring fog, or whatever you want to call it, being up high doesn't really convey any advantage, because even if you were right at the bottom of the level, you could still see where every single enemy is.
Right, okay.
However, if you have something like this, suddenly high ground is much more valuable, because you can look down and see everything. And so, that's why it was important to have it, because that's something, it gives you something, kind of a bit of texture, a bit of flavor to environments.
And I think one of the areas that I saw a lot about, I think it was at 2017 or 2018 Develop, you were doing a talk about jumping, and it was like the amount of effort that went into making it feel good, even though it goes against what you would think as a human how it should work. It doesn't work like that, because it then feels better.
I mean, we had this situation where you quickly discover why people perhaps choose not to blend these two genres together. You have this, if you think of a classic sort of Metroid game, it is very instinctual. You can hammer a lot of the buttons a lot of the time for shooting and jumping, and there's no penalty to that. There's no reason not to do that. And so the game is based around making that feel nice and fun, and the abilities they add to that game are much more, overt. They dramatically change the way you move around. In our game, we wanted to have them tighter, because really, we want the main thing that happens over the course of the game is the player gets better at playing it, and that's how they do it. So we do add, to their abilities, but they're small amounts. And that, combined with, obviously, you've got the stealth angle, so how much noise things make is actually important. So,
okay. So I didn't know there was a noise factor to this.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, running is louder than walking,
right,
and again, in a normal Metroid game, it doesn't make any difference, but for us it does. So we've got these two movesets that do fight each other a little bit, and we gradually over time, primarily by level design, we just set up sort of constrained sandboxes where it's like, I'm not going to tell you how to do the thing, but the only way you're going to get out of here is by doing it.
Right, literally, you can't do anything without doing the thing that I'm teaching you.
Yeah. And there's good ways of doing it and bad ways of doing it. Yeah, that's very important, and that's, that level design is very helpful, and that's based entirely on what we were talking about earlier, based on the metrics, right? Because you couldn't possibly design those things if you didn't know exactly how high people can jump and how they move and what feels good to do, because you want to work with that.
How long do you spend on the metrics before development?
Quite a while. Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is, compared to how you would normally work on these things, because of the sort of slightly convoluted way it was developed, we did actually have a number of animations first, which never do that. So, it's kind of another topic, but the artist has already done a lot of work for sort of a different version of it. So anyway, long story short, a lot of these animations already existed, and we did use that as a starting point for what looks right with what we have. And to be fair, that got us quite a long way. And then you go, okay, well, that looks about right. And then the problem would tend to be, it's like, okay, and this is a surprise to no designer, including myself, you go, okay, that looks about right, but now it feels really bad. So
right, because you're animating not to the timing, but animating to the
animation. It was a big inspiration for them, but this was also taking it too far. It was, much more towards the original Prince of Persia, where it feels less like you're really instinctively controlling a character, rather than like you're sort of dragging one along. You know what I mean? You've got your little bits of control over them, but they're kind of doing their own thing. They've got their own inertia, and it looked great, but it's as much as that game is a classic, it's quite frustrating, and it's a very steep learning curve. So we kind of got to the point where they look right, And then I just had to say to them, like, look, I've got to break all of this visually and to make it feel good, which is the next stage. And then, we kind of tweaked the animations from there. But I'll be honest, a lot of it was just intuitive. And then you get to a point where you go, yeah, these look about right. And then you have to obviously make sure that they are different enough that they have utility, right? The higher jump has to be significantly higher, so you go, oh, okay, well, I see why this is useful, and I see why the other things are useful, because again, like, we were right on the knife edge of them all being a little too close together, but, we didn't want to have, like, whatever the medieval equivalent of, like, a jetpack is. You didn't want something that really changes your moveset.
And that's one of the hard things. I think I was talking to Jamie Deegan about Hellscreen, and a lot of it is like, okay, let's get the movement right. Never mind anything else, let's get the movement right. And it's very difficult to maybe convey unless you're playtesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that is the strongest feedback loop you're going to have as a platformer, right? You're constantly moving and reacting to how it moves. And, if you get that right, people can quite easily overlook a lot of other details, but it doesn't work the other way around. If something controls bad to start with, it's never going to feel good, and they're not going to probably continue playing your game.
I find very interesting that you're doing this by metrics, by being able to say, like, this is the optimum or the median that we think is okay, and we have a certain leeway on either side or speed or...
Yeah, it's like you can't expect, maybe, we might have some hidden content or whatever, but by and large, the completion of the game, you can't expect players to sort of a normal player through a normal playthrough to be able to min-max everything, to time the jump so they get absolute perfect height and, the absolute biggest horizontal distance. We'd like players to work towards that, but if you did that, straight away, it would just feel bad because new players would feel like they're doing it wrong. And crucially, not only would they feel they're doing it wrong, it's not really going to offer the correct feedback. That it's not going to say, oh, you nearly made it, try again. It's just going to say, nah. And I think the most frustrating thing in any platforming game, let alone a Metroidvania, is if you're not sure. If you try and jump across a gap, if you nearly make it but fall off and die, that's the worst, because you're like, did I do it wrong, or can I not make that distance? Really, our game, we kind of do, we do this, right? It's like, you're never going to do that. If you can't make a gap, it's going to be a good couple of tiles out. So doesn't matter how hard you jump, you're not going to make that.
And this was, like, in 3D terms, like, I remember very specifically Tomb Raider had a very obvious distance that you could jump.
Mm-hmm.
I say it was very obvious, but then again, I remember falling down a lot. But,
yeah.
But,
But that was... Again,
that's a timing thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sort of reminds me, it's not the same, but to me it's got some of the same kind of vibe as the original Prince of Persia, where there's kind of two stages. The first stage is you realise what the path is, you figure it out, and a very separate stage to that is the actual execution of it, which is quite difficult. And I think these days, I think the former's still a lot of fun, and the latter, outside of, well, it's not what we were aiming for, right? We're not aiming for really difficult execution to progress through the game.
Right, that's not the puzzle. Because you got the other puzzle that's laid on top of that, which is stealth.
Yeah, exactly. We've got a lot of that, and we want to encourage mastery, but not for the critical path, because I just don't like it when people do that.
Do you think a lot of these decisions on metrics-based stuff is because you were working on racing games before?
No, not specifically. I really do think it applies to everything. I just think that's I
haven't heard the metrics-based approach.
Obviously it depends on your game. For example, let's say I feel like it's probably less valuable for horror games and things like that. But for anything where you're talking about,
how scared are you?
Yeah, right, exactly. They do exist. Obviously, there is how fast you move, how fast the enemies move. But I don't feel like horror is one of these great sort of counter examples, because really you don't make things that way. You don't make them in this artificially paced way so everything feels good. In fact, obviously you might be doing literally the opposite. You want to make them feel uncomfortable and bad. So yeah, you could, but I feel it's less
looking at you, Resident Evil 2 with your weird tank controls.
Yeah, that's a good example of stuff like that. And hey, it's another topic, but I think it's applicable. I generally think it's applicable to everything. I can't imagine how you could have confidence in what you've built if you don't know those. You can willfully ignore that information if you want, but I cannot personally imagine how you could create a space without being very aware of those.
Especially, as you say, in like the very specific traversal type, not specific, but very accurate traversal type games, you know? Platformer being one, like you have to hit the platform. It's not like a matter that you can just wander around a corridor.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And obviously with the Metroid angle, we need to make a clear distinction between, yes, you can go up here if you master the controls, master the abilities you have, or no, like a firm no, you can't make this until you have an ability you don't have. Right, so that's like why
a grapple hook or something like this. Yeah, these are the yeses and these are the no's.
Yeah, right? And the thing is, those are easy to create once you have the metrics, because literally, I will have already built the room that proves that ability. Right, you make a room that's you spend time on it. And you go right, this room. The only way out of this room is to use that ability. There's no other way. So once you've built that, you can literally put that in the game and be like, right, well, that's the room where we will give you whatever it is, and then it just works already. That's the way to do that, as far as I'm concerned.
How does this then lead to the overall pacing of the level? So, do you get in? These are the abilities that they're going to introduce. Therefore, we're going to have this level in which you introduce it. We're then now going to let you play it.
Yeah. So. This is something I did sort of struggle to figure out a bit myself. I had some ideas of roughly how to pace these things, but then there's a person called, it's either Keenan or Kynan, it's very embarrassing, can't remember which, kind of Pearson. He worked on some of the 3D Metroids, I believe, and he wrote a blog, and it's literally called like how to make levels for a Metroidvania. And there's lots of really great stuff in it, but the main part is that he suggests that what you do is you think of all the abilities you want in the game, and then you build one of these, I can't remember what he calls it, but we call them like gating rooms. It's that you build the room that proves out this ability, so that you can't exit it until you've used the ability correctly. So you build all of those for every ability you want in the game, and then what you can do is stick them all together, right, in a long line, and then you can move them, change the order, and you put them all in the order that you think feels nicest, has the nicest flow between them. And then once you've got that, you go, okay, great, well now you just sprinkle these over the levels. And in terms of Siege Fox, how that works is that, so I kind of stay focused, but also I just try, and I cannot hold both things in my mind at once. One of the other guys is much more familiar with the story beats and the narrative angle of it, and how that ties into the locations that we have. Okay. And when I say locations at this stage, it's kind of high level, this place is roughly here and this is roughly there. Obviously examples being, well, obviously the pits are towards the bottom and the palace is at the top, but there are bits in between that will fill in. And so he's got an idea of that, but then I know in terms of the pure mechanical pacing, well, this ability goes here, that ability goes there. And I think this is one of these things where people might think, well, okay, yeah, but then what if the best story location for this unlock is somewhere else? And that's one of the few times I do put my foot down and be like, doesn't really matter. Like, we can explain a way around why this ability appeared here and not here, and players aren't going to question it if they're having a good time. However, if they give them something that's frustrating or disrupts the overall flow of the game, I'm not really going to make them feel any better by saying, but you see, in terms of the story, isn't that neater?
Right.
So I bend where I can for the story and, in terms of locations, how things click together. But with the pure mechanics and stuff like that, I am firm. Not inflexible, but firm, because at the end of the day, people play video games. Well, this kind of game is, as we talked about, it's very mechanically driven. So that is going to...
And how it's going to feel, and I'm not talking about the how you have pressed X and you've jumped. It's more like, how does it feel in the overall flow?
Yeah.
One way that I try to look at some games are, well, your core mechanics, sure, like the game loop, but into tactical and strategic parts. It's like my whole strategy is learning about the story of the siege. I don't know how the game progresses, but my tactical one would be like, how am I going to get out of the room? And then you've got your core game loop, which is like, I'm going to jump up on this and I'm going to jump up on this.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have the multi-stages, right, where it's like you get one ability and you're like, oh yeah, that's cool, and now that lets me go into this room. And you get another one, you're like, yeah, that's kind of cool. And then I'll dangle something nearby and it's like, oh, but what if you use both of them together? And you'll be like, oh yeah, that's really cool. And so structuring that to me takes precedence over, as I said, like, the story.
But it wouldn't make sense story-wise for that.
Yeah, like I said, you could make an argument for, well, no, this belongs here in the story and that belongs there, and you wouldn't unlock, whatever these before that, and it's like, but thankfully everyone on the team gets it. I'm like, sure, we will try and do that, but in terms of, production and everything, it's like we're led by making it mechanically interesting, and, story's just got to bend there.
I don't think there's that many games where, I don't know, I haven't been behind the scenes for, like, let's say, The Last of Us, where you said, like, you're going to learn how to, like, hit someone with a rock here.
Yeah.
And then learn how to throw a rock here, which makes sense, but then you go like, well, you don't get a gun here because...
Yeah, I mean, obviously I don't know, but I imagine that probably does happen. The difference with them is obviously they're in the privileged position that they have the money and thus the time to, if it doesn't work, just throw it out or do it again. But really for us, like, let's for argument's sake say, we did something that I consider foolish, right? And say, okay, let's write the first story bit, and we'll record the VO, and the voice actress is going to say, oh, and then she came into this room, and then and then unlocked the boots of running really cool. And then later on, I'm like, actually, there's way more fun to put those somewhere else or whatever. And then you're like, well, now we've got to re-record all the dialogue and change it all. Whereas for me...
It's a very expensive proposition.
Yeah, whereas, I mean, we haven't done this yet. We haven't quite reached that stage. I don't know exactly how we do it. But yeah, the story will deliberately not do that. And when it comes to narrating, unlocking of abilities, it will be a more generic line. And, some people might be like, oh, why doesn't it delve into that a bit more? But as I said, like... I know it's such an obvious thing to say, but the gameplay is just king, and we don't have the infinite time or budget, so yeah.
Well, you have to make decisions. And I think even in big companies, there has to be a limited amount of budget that you're going to go for these explorations.
That's how I feel, yeah.
And you can imagine being head of whatever department it is, that you've tried 10 different things and 10 different things are wrong.
Yeah.
I think by then your job's going to be slightly on the line.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And so... And the thing is as well, it's not like I'm just winging it, because obviously using the method we described, borrowed from our good friend, like, I'll have tested all these rooms and all these orders, and I can say, look, this is the one that has the nicest progression and feel to it, so that's why they go in this order. And then if anything changes, we can try, switch them around. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing all of that, but it's one of the few things I probably haven't ever really wavered on much. And like I said, I'm not trying to paint a picture that I've been fought on that, but it's one of the things early on I was like, we're just not going to do it that way around. And I'm just like, yeah, good. I still feel that
You put your cardboard sword into the sand.
Yeah. It's one of the few times where it's just like, trust me, this is the way to do this.
When do you think we can get to play the game?
Oh, I couldn't possibly tell you.
When it's done, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope you could play it when it's done. Otherwise, there's a real problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming and talk to us. If people wanted to find out more about the game, where should they go to?
I believe it's siegeandsandfox.com and siegeandthesandfox.com, because we captured all the domains.
And if they wanted to tweet at you and ask you questions about
I am CR so CRWILSO.
And thank you again.
Thank you very much for having me.
Bye.